Hey everyone, it's Ro with Ro's Wigglers. I know it's been a little while, but I am in the middle of doing a project down here, and I'm realizing this is the perfect thing to fill you in on. Things have been busy, busy, busy for me. I do a lot of garden consulting and labor and landscape stuff, and so this time of year has kept me really busy and really tired. So apologies for not having any content, but this is exciting. So, to give you a little update on what's going on, I've been in contact with another local worm farmer that decided he wanted to get out of the business. He's about 45 minutes away from me, and he circled back a little while back and messaged me and said, you know what, I am ready to sell those two CFT continuous flow through systems and all of the worms and everything that is in there. And I jumped on it. This is an amazing, amazing deal for me. I got two CFT systems that are DIY made out of the IBC totes, the big water containers, and then at least 20 pounds of worms for $400. And so it sounds like a lot of money for worms, but for me, getting my business off the ground, this is huge. And so I'm very excited. So I try to keep it in frame here. What you can see is I have a whole bunch of buckets. This is actually round two. This is my second trip for unloading the second continuous flow through system that he had, because I had to unload all the worms and the bedding into the buckets in order to drive them back home and then go get the system, set that up. And now I'm in the process where I'm organizing the worms. Basically, I'm emptying each bucket. I'm trying to remove the larger breeder worms. I'm not checking each one for a clitellum, which would show that that worm is mature enough to breed, but I'm picking out the bigger ones, putting them in trays like this so that I can continue to reproduce my population. And then all of the baby worms or younger worms are going to go into that continuous flow through system and start really making me a lot of castings. And so my plan is, as I reset my breeder bins that are set up like this, I'll be dumping all of those cocoons into the CFT system. I'll also jumpstart it with a lot more adult worms too, but this will let me get my breeder bins set up. And so I wanted to take you along on the journey. I changed my mind a million times on how I wanted to do this process, but I think I have a good system in place now. And so I wanted to show you what I'm doing. So what I have here, this is one of the bins from the first round that I brought. And so it already has an okay amount of the worms in here. And this is a mix of red wigglers and blue worms, but it is definitely mostly, I would say, 80% red wigglers. So I have worms in here already, but I want to add more breeder worms to really get this bin going. At some point, I'll circle back and possibly even weigh out the worms to 1 pound per square foot, because that's what's ideal for breeding conditions. Ideally, in this bin, I would have 1.5 to 2 pounds, if my math is right. Seems like my breeder bins are happy with that. So what I'm going to do is toss the bigger worms into here, so this will be a breeder bin. This bucket is going to be excess bedding, so I'm going to use the light method a little bit to get the worms to go down so I can remove some of that bedding, because the thing that will happen is if I go and dump all of these buckets directly back into that big CFT system, it's essentially like when you turn your compost bin and that compost heats up. And so I can only add maybe 3 buckets at a time to keep the system from heating up and baking the worms. So what I'm doing is I'm taking out some of this excess bedding, and this is going to serve me as having bedding already prepared for the unforeseeable future. As I switch out my breeder bins and all of those sorts of things, I'll have bedding ready to go. And this will have some babies and cocoons in it, and that's fine. They'll just keep this really biologically active for me in the meantime. So I'll store these buckets with the lids off so that air can still continue to get to this bedding. this is my empty bin that I'm going to initially dump the bucket into so that I can sort from there. So that's kind of my overview. I'm going to put on my gloves and get into it and kind of talk you through the process as I go. I hope this is helpful for somebody out there, or at least interesting. I don't know if anyone else has inherited or found a way to purchase this many worms at one time in this way. So I'm sure someone out there will get something good out of this information. Okay, so let me grab this first bucket here. It's quite heavy because this bedding, the guy that sold me this keeps his bedding very, very wet. And what I saw was that these worms love it. He like saturated that bedding. And these worms, I mean, I have not seen happier, healthy worms in quite some time. So kudos to Dan. He was doing the thing. So, dumping this into this tray. And one thing I'll point out is, yep, so inside here are a whole bunch of worms stuck to the side. And I was really struggling with what to do with this. And I've figured out that what I'll do is when we get to the end of this tray over here and I have it pretty much ready for me to transport over to where the CFT bin is, which by the way, I have run out of room in my basement. And fortunately, I have a friend that lives right around the block that is letting me use their basement to put these 2 CFT systems in. So that's really cool. But I'll have to transport the worms over there. So I'll get all these worms out with my little trick that I came up with a little later, and I'll show you. Put the empty bucket down here for now. And what I've got here is this tray. It is loaded with worms. Oh my gosh. I'm going to spread it out a little bit and also start to kind of agitate the material to make the worms want to go down away from the light. I'm actually going to try to scoot this a little bit over so I can get it a little more in the light. It's not a perfect system, I suppose. There's a worm right there. Okay, and so spread this out a little bit, try to break it up. This one's really wet, so this was probably one from closer toward the bottom of the CFT system. Okay, and so now all I'm going to do is I'm going to go through anywhere I see the bigger worms. Like I said, I am not going to check each worm to see if it has a clitellum. That would just, I mean, what I'm already doing is probably the most, but I'm trying to set myself up for a nice strong start with these breeder bins. And if I do this now, then I'll have that part situated and won't have to do it later. So I'm just picking any of these bigger worms off the surface, and I'm also agitating the surface of this bin to encourage the worms to dive down deeper, which will leave me primarily just bedding on the top that I can scoop off and add into my bucket. So, picking off all these bigger breeder worms, I'm throwing them into this breeder bin where they're going to live their best life and, you know, do what worms do that I want them to do. I probably can't say it on YouTube, so I won't, but you know what I'm doing. Okay, so I have this nice and agitated now. I'm already not seeing very many worms on the surface because they're quick to go down to try to get away from that light. They don't like the light. Okay. And now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to just scrape, here's a worm, scrape the very top layer, the surface layer of bedding material off of this tray. And, oh, here's a rock. I'm just going to throw that away. And so, as I scrape this bedding material, the worms are going to keep going down, and that allows me to scoop up a handful and just throw it into the bucket for later use. And like I said, there will still be probably mostly baby worms and cocoons in this bedding, and I'm okay with that. They can live in here. They'll be just fine. This one is much wetter, so it's a little harder even for me to do this part of the process where I'm scraping off the surface. Found me a little produce sticker because no composter can ever escape the dang produce stickers, I swear. It's a nightmare. bedding in here. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. I know that I am starting to have more worm farmers follow me since I've been engaging and checking out their videos and learning so much from them. I highly recommend checking out some of the other local worm farmers. Jane with Rockin' Worms has quickly become one of my favorite worm educators, I guess I would say. I love Ann over at Plant Obsessed. Captain Matt and his worm farm, he's really cute. He has his grandkids and he's so enthusiastic about worms and has so much knowledge. Great one to follow and learn from. Who else? I think her title is The Garden and Worm Lady, and she just kind of hangs out with you and talks while she does her thing in her wormery, so that's kind of fun. I'm sure there's more. Oh, Missouri Worm Supply, obviously. He's local. I've learned a lot from him, both from his YouTube and his social media. He does little quick reels, as well as I've talked to him on the phone multiple times, and he's been able to give me some good advice from a business perspective and also a little bit about how he does his worms. And I really like that collaborative energy. I'm not here to be in competition with people, and it seems like the worm farming community, those that I'm involved with, like in the groups and the Facebook pages, and Captain Matt actually has this really amazing chat forum on his website, wormpeople.com, where you can join. You get a little app called Heartbeat. It's kind of like Slack or Discord. It's a messenger app. And there are tons and tons of experienced worm farmers in there and new people. And there's different topics for discussion threads, and you can get in there and ask questions. And it is just such an amazing place to learn. And that's the vibe in there too. People are all about collaboration. They're not trying to hold on to their secret worm chow recipes or not tell people how they run their business because somehow they think that that's going to get them ahead of the next worm farmer. And I really appreciate that kind of energy. Like, I'm all about, if you're local, we're not in competition. Let's see how we can support each other. So that's a little bit about me and how I've been navigating this business. Just kind of on a tangent there, I guess. But yeah, here's a couple more little breeders. I'm going to pop them into here. You see, I haven't even been really seeing that many worms as I've been scraping this material like this, because they are continuing to go down. I am still getting a few in the bucket, like I said, but I'm good with that. In fact, it's actually probably a good thing to keep this bedding nice and biologically active, which is what we want. We want it to be alive. The life is what we're going for. This is really wet material. So I would not, my original, the first round I uncovered all of these trays and I tried to run fans over them to dry off the surface so I could sift the material. No. It's just, that's too long. And I found that I originally expected it to be a little more finished off and that I would have more castings, but it's actually just very fine bedding that's not fully processed yet. So we're going to keep it running through the system so we can really end up with that really good end product that we're going for. Out. Another rock. Yeah, and the guy I purchased this from, he showed me his setup. I live in the city, so I don't have access to these things yet, though I have started my land search, and one of the first things I'll be doing when we get land is setting up a huge vermicompost situation. But he has a spot, and he has a little tractor, and so he has different piles. He has a pile of aged manure, a pile of aged mulched up leaves, a pile of compost, and something else, and that's how he has a specific mixture that he was making his bedding from, like one bucket of this, one bucket of this, one bucket of this, and it's really beautiful bedding. I'm a little envious of the manure. I don't really mess with that here in the city, and I'm also apprehensive of manure because unless you really know your source, you could easily end up with broadleaf herbicides and things that I really don't want to end up in mine or other people's gardens. Not sure if they would kill the worms, but it would definitely hurt the plants. And I do this in order to improve soil and benefit gardens. So for me, I do not want broadleaf herbicides to end up in my soil. But I thought it was pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to the day I have land and a tractor and I can move big piles around and mix them up. Everything I do is very much human scale right now, mixing by hand with a pitchfork and all that. Whoops, now I'm throwing bedding into the breeder bin because I'm confusing myself. But yeah, I hope this is helpful. I'm trying to just get this as low as I can so that I have in the bottom primarily just worms. And so this may require me to start in on that other bucket too. So you might not get to see me spray out the bucket like I was going to show. But let's see. Okay. Get a little more in there. Then I'm going to start flipping this and looking for worms one more time. Pulling out the breeders. Because now they've all moved down, and ironically, I know that was the goal for me to get them to move down so I could get this bedding. But I also want to pull out some of these breeder worms, like this one. So, okay, so this is a bucket of bedding for the future. And I am going to move it over to this side so I know that it's not the same as the other buckets that I'm pulling things from, because that would be a shame. I'll pull this empty bucket that I just dumped up here and start putting bedding into it. I'm almost down as low as I want to be because I'm not trying to get rid of all this bedding. I do want to add bedding and worms into the CFT. This first batch, I'll bring over probably 3 or 4 trays. I've already added some new bedding into the bottom. And so I'll bring over 3 or 4 trays like this that are mostly worms, but also some nice active bedding, and I'll dump those into the CFT. Getting pretty close here. What I'm trying to do. Oh, rock. I think he probably scoops up rocks with this tractor when he's mixing his piles and stuff. But yeah, Dan was a nice guy. I enjoyed getting to chat with him. Had a beautiful shed. Just shed of my dreams. Not a shed, a garage. Multiple garage doors, pegboards everywhere, tools, all the kind of tools you could think of. Just this beautiful, for me, a playground, really. And I hope to have a space like that in my near future. I've been dreaming and planning and saving and working my butt off in order to get to this space, and we're getting closer. I'm working with a group of 6 people, and we are planning to get some acreage and build homes on it, and that's where I'll be finally starting my own market farm. And these worms will be the primary thing to support my really getting my soil health where I want it to be, because that's how I got into this in the first place. Is I'm obsessed with soil health, and I have learned that vermicomposting and adding worm castings and doing regular foliar sprays and soil drenches with worm casting tea has been by far the most absolute beneficial thing to my production out of anything I've done. I do organic growing, and it's just absolutely incredible. Currently, I am the founder of and lead a local community garden where we bring people together once a week. I do education on how to garden. But for most of the people that come, it's definitely much more of a community building social event. And then we harvest during that time as well. And we, at the end, everybody loads up their bags of fresh produce that's free, and they take it with them, and they come back the next week. And they also kind of post in our little Discord, what did they make with that produce? Everyone's like sharing recipes and building friendships, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so that's kind of how I found my way to this in the first place. Okay, I have gotten this down to a small enough amount of bedding for me. We're just going to get rid of this rock. So now the last step for this one, like I said, I'm just going to start periodically flipping this over. And so when I flip it, a whole bunch of worms that have gone to the bottom are now at the top. And so I'm picking out all these larger worms, leaving the smaller ones, because they're going to mature in their little grow out CFT bin and make me lots of worm castings. It's a nice handful you can see up close. Throw these little guys in here. Just flip over another section. Get some of these. He's got some really nice, big, fat red wigglers. So like I said, I am really impressed with what he was doing with his worms. They're happy. Dan, if you ever end up watching my YouTube channel, thank you again. I know I've said it a million times, but I know that you gave me a really, really big deal, and I super appreciate it and what this is going to do for me and for my business. I was trying to scale up, 4 pounds at a time, trying to get the wigglers breeding, and, it's been a fun process, but this is really going to allow me to be able to do a lot more, a lot faster. And so, greatly appreciate it. Okay. So basically, this is the last step. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to pull out a good number of breeders. I'm going to put them in the breeder bin. The last thing I'll do is I'll take a Sharpie, and I have tape on the front of all of my bins, and I have learned from Robbie at Missouri Worm Supply. He does different color painter's tape, basically, and I've started using that in my process too. I think I do it a little bit differently than him, but you should check him out. He's got a brilliant system that he uses to help manage his calendar and when he resets his bins and all that, and it's pretty cool. But I'm just going to put a check mark on that piece of tape. That lets me know that I have already added more worms to that breeder bin, and then I'll pull out a new one and I'll do the whole thing all over again. So I hope this is helpful to you. Like I said, I figure someone may have experienced this at some time. If nothing else, it's really fun and interesting. Feel free to leave your comments, give me feedback. Let me know if you think that my process is on point, because I've got like 20 more buckets to go. So if you've got a better idea, I would love to hear it. And remember, until next time, healthy soil, healthy plants, happy worms.